what does your research show you about this trend being driven by people not liking who they work for? And
She's worked for me, so she always asks this question. Hey everyone, this is Heine Zachariasen here, and welcome to Founders Weekly, where we tell stories we can learn from. Today we're going to talk about founders. What are they or we like? How are we different? Are there sides that we like and there are sides that we don't like? What do we look for in a founder and what do we not look for in a founder? My co-host today is Courtney Quattrini. Courtney has worked 20 years in PR and communication and 10 of those years with Vivino and me. She's an expert in communications and recently made a total career change and now is an associate psychotherapist. Now becoming an expert both in communication and also in founders and how founders think. Welcome, Courtney.
Thanks, Heine. Nice to be here again.
Yeah, it's good to have you. So let's go straight to today's subject. We're going to talk about the founder's personality and how that relates to the startup success. We'll base the conversation on an article in Scientific Report. But before we get into the study, you do have some experience with founders, right, Courtney? I mean, apart from working with me.
Yeah. So in my work, I have done executive coaching, and that oftentimes has involved founders or CEOs or other leaders. And as a therapist, I do work with some founders in that capacity, though we'll be more discreet on that side of things due to confidentiality. But yes, you are not my only founder, despite
No.
what you sometimes
Although the
think.
one you have gone deep into, right? I mean, 10 years of therapy with you is a lot.
Psychoanalyzing you, not in a therapy room, but
No,
maybe
that's true. That is true. With the experience you have and working with, like, shall I say, difficult founders and people like me, would you want to specialize going down that route to be a therapist for founders?
I've thought about that. It's actually a place where I started, but now how I think about it is because I've worked with founders and co-founders, it led me to want to be a couples therapist. And
Oh,
so
really?
I think the
Maybe it's
skill
the same.
set, yeah, it kind of overlaps. And oftentimes when I'm meeting with new couples, I tell them, while I'm a new therapist, my training working with executives and founders has given me the training to do this in some respects. So
A
maybe.
little bit too much experience, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Although you
Okay,
and Tice were easy breezy.
yeah,
Anyone who listened to last week's show will know that the two of you are incredible together and agree to disagree. So you
yeah,
two
we
made
do.
that easy.
Yeah, we're also 9 hours apart. I think that helped a lot.
Yeah, that's true. We can't get too much of
Yeah,
each other. So
no. Okay, let's dig into the study here. So Paul X. McCarthy, lead author of the study and adjunct professor at UNSW Sydney, says, we find that personality traits don't simply matter for startup, they are critical to elevating the chances of success. And he continues, a small part of astute venture capitalists have suspected this for some time, but now we have data to demonstrate that this is the case. So a little bit more here on that before we chat again. The research shows that various factors influencing startup success, concluding that personality traits of founders significantly predict success, even more so than industry or age of the startup. Okay, so the first thing they conclude, which is I think is really interesting, is the diversity. So let's dig a little bit into that. So they measured the personality of the founders and they used this method called the Big Five. Popular method to do this. It looks at traits like openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversions, agreeableness, and emotional stability. Ooh, emotional stability. There you go. So let's look at the model first, the Big Five model. Do you know it, Courtney?
yes, I do know it. It's widely regarded as one of the best, most scientifically backed personality tests. So, yes. So, I would back up and address personality tests in general first. I love this topic today for obvious reasons. And what I would say is they can be helpful. But what I like about the Big Five is it doesn't pathologize or categorize you. And so a lot of the Myers-Briggs, the Enneagram, they immediately put you into one bucket. And then
Okay.
oftentimes you can retake the test, that bucket changes. And a lot of people get really attached to these results in a similar way to people get attached to mental health diagnoses. And so I say, use personality tests like you would anything else to learn about yourself, but be curious. The big five, however, it doesn't put you into a bucket. It gives you
Okay.
percentages around different traits and
Yes.
characteristics.
Okay. Okay. So that's how it is. So you can see, oh, you have some of this and less of this and so on and so forth, right?
Exactly. Yep. And you can
Yeah.
see, oh, well, under this category, I might actually want to address that about myself, but you're going to tell us what all those categories are, right?
We're going to dig a little bit into this because what they found out was this thing about diversity, and then they mention an example and say, look, like take these three types that could easily lead to success. So let me explain. So there's one called adventurous leader, an imaginative engineer, and an extrovert developer, and they found that like a group like that can lead to look bigger odds of success. First, so you know me well. So which category of these three am I in?
Well, that's interesting because the big five has five different traits, and one of them is neuroticism. And so it sounds like this study took components of the big five and then
Exactly.
created their own three categories.
Labels. Yeah.
And I was ready to talk about neuroticism with you. I'll leave that as a side, but cool things like neurotic, if you score highly in the neuroticism category of the big five, there's links to earlier mortality. So
Oh, wow.
stress, connection to cigarette smoking. So some really cool stuff in there that I'd love to see these studies attached to founders drill down in. So tell me them one more time. Say, so we've got three options.
Yes. Adventurous leader, imaginative engineer, and extroverted developer. Extroverted developer is not a developer as in an engineer, but developer of you business developer kind of thing. So it's a different.
You could fit into all of those. I'd say adventurous leader, though, the most.
Yeah, I think so too. I think so. I think that's where I would have the most. But yeah, I agree. Obviously not an engineer, but compared to others, maybe technical side is kind of strong compared to other business-minded people.
And you haven't taken the Big Five test. I know this is a
I have
different
not
test.
taken the Big Five test. Yeah,
So
no. We've
follow
we've
up,
tried different tests together too.
but follow
Um,
up, you should take the Big Five.
yes. So we're gonna dig a little bit into that and how they did this because apparently you don't have to take it. So the way they did this research was not by having a lot of people take the test. They did something else. But I wanted to take these three types a little bit and sort of see what were these three types and talk about another type just to talk about them. So the first one was the adventurous leader, right? And traits are like risk taking, visionary, and dynamic, right? I mean, that probably fits pretty well with me, right?
Especially dynamic, Heine.
Yeah, especially crazy dynamic. And the next one here, they again a combination of these three was what they really liked and could be really successful. Was the imaginative engineer, creative, technical, and problem solving, right? And if you look at like Thijs, was he maybe more? Thijs is Vivino's co-founder. Was he more in this bucket? Do you think?
Yes, absolutely. You were more NR, I'd say more visionary, and then Tice would, I'd say, be more inclined to tackle the problem head on in a way.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Yes, I agree. And it says imaginative engineer. I would maybe it also when you look at the description, it is also a lot of product development. So it is technically minded, but like creative on building a product and so on. I think
Yeah.
that's a really important role. So then we have the last one here in this group. I was a little bit surprised they had an engineer and a developer in here, but actually it's called the extroverted developer, and that's not meant as a programmer because the traits are social, persuasive, and excellent networker. That's not the typical profile of an engineer. So this is more the sales. This is the salesperson, right? So that's why it's a little bit confusing. But the extrovert developer is the sales, business development, sales, marketing, and that kind of stuff.
Okay. And so you're going to get to how they got to this.
Yes, I'm going to. Now your brain's really going on that.
Yeah,
I'm going to get to that
I
in a
got to know.
second.
I got to know more.
But these are the three types, and then there was a fourth type, which they called the operational specialist, and I think that's especially later. But it's an organized, detail-oriented, and process-oriented person. I'd say if you have a startup that's very operationally heavy, you really want to have this person in there pretty early on, right?
Yeah, sure.
It definitely took a while till we had that person. Okay, so let's dig into the methodology since you are so darn curious about that part of it. So there's a big database out there of founders and startups called Crunchbase. So they used Crunchbase to find all these founders and so on. And then they did the next thing here again. was they looked at Twitter, and they only used founders, that were active on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
And then they would read all their tweets and then used AI. They used IBM Watson's personality insights to infer the personality facets. So the service has just, reads all these things and then gives them scores and sort of percentiles on the big 5 domains. So this is an interesting method. What do you say, Courtney?
Oh, my instinct is I don't like it. There's and I haven't read it, so my disclaimer is I haven't read the methodology in detail enough to really speak to it, but I immediately think who goes on Twitter, who's vocal on Twitter, what information do we have on X? I immediately start questioning this methodology. What about you?
Yeah, this is the problem too, right? So now Twitter is associated with something specific. Maybe it says a lot about your personality right now if you're on Twitter. But no, I know a lot of diverse people on Twitter. It's not that. But I'm a little bit concerned. First of all, since for the last couple of years, Twitter and X, what it has sort of associates with something now, that's one thing. The other thing is, and I don't know how good this piece of software is, but can it really figure out your personality? Looking at the tweets you made,
I guess that's what I
on
mean is think about the parts of us that we show the world. So I have this
exactly.
exercise that I do in therapy where I have people to create a mask, and on the front of the mask, this is not something I created, it's a well-known therapeutic tactic. And on the outside of the mask, they write the parts of themselves they show other people. And on the back of the mask, it's what am I hiding? I think about social media as the front of that mask. I'm very, very openly showing people certain parts that I've self-selected. That's not the true me in a lot of instances.
No, but let's turn that around again. Maybe that exactly tells us a lot about you, that you try and stage these things.
Who, me?
Yes.
Specifically? Well, I'm not staging.
No, I'm just generally.
Oh.
You're showing a certain part of yourself, and maybe that tells a lot about you anyway.
Oh, gotcha. But was that something that they considered? I don't know. That, is there a bias built in?
That's a good question.
Yeah, we'll have to reach out to them directly.
We'll have to dig into that AI model there too. I mean, AI can do a lot, and maybe we'll have on our future episodes, we'll have some of the AI experts comment on, do you really think you can do this or not? So we're gonna have to dig a little bit into that. I must say, I have a doubts. Go ahead.
When you think about bias, so personality tests in general started, I think it was in the early 1900s, maybe 1920s, and it started as looking at a group of educated white men. And so then scientists started to say, okay, well, we need a broader population set. I'm curious about the connection between using Twitter and AI and connecting it to founders and that set of people, because it's not the broad population.
Yeah, yes, exactly. And I'm also worried that you introduce a bias right away because you don't take the people that are not active on Twitter.
Yeah.
So that's bias number one. That would be one challenge.
Right.
We are back. Today's guest is James Wise. James Wise is a partner at Balderton Capital and the author of the book Startup Century. Welcome, James.
Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you on. Let's dig right in here. So the book argues that we're witnessing a significant shift towards a world where entrepreneurship and self-employment are becoming a norm. So let's first assume that it's true. But why is that? What has changed over the last year that led to you believing this and also, writing a book about it?
Yeah, well, so, over the last 100 years, we've actually seen a move away from the norm, from people working for themselves or working for small organizations. And what we've seen is a capture of the way we work on one side by medium and large organizations. So more and more people working in medium-sized companies, over 1,000 full-time employees, up to large multinationals. And on the other side, certainly in many democracies and even non-democracies, people working for the state. And so the state of play really in the early 90s to late 90s for most people was unusual in a global context. It was they were working for one of those two things. And we saw record lows in terms of the number of new people starting businesses, working for themselves, or working for micro businesses, which is defined as about 10 full-time employees in the 90s. And over the last 2 decades, we've really turned a corner across most advanced economies and many different countries in the world for many different reasons. So whether you look at sort of Qatar or Brazil, you look at sort of India or the UK, almost everywhere there's been this increase in the number of people starting businesses. And the reason is twofold, right? One is more people want to start businesses. The cost of starting a business has dropped significantly, right? We know software's got cheaper. The internet has allowed people to do things a lot faster. And now we have all of these tools at our disposal. And actually, in many countries, it actually got easier as well. So the cost has got easier to start a business. And culturally, there's been more role models around entrepreneurship, which has a huge impact in the likelihood that you're going to start a business. It's a really under-discussed trait that if you are related to an entrepreneur, you know an entrepreneur, you work in the same office as someone who goes to start a business, you're more likely to do it. So there's been this mass shift towards people choosing to become entrepreneurs, but also more people are having to become entrepreneurs because this traditional setup I was talking about between these large multinationals and the state, they're employing fewer and fewer people in good, stable jobs. So actually that idea that you can, go to college, maybe go to university and get a stable job in a career that's going to last you a lifetime is shrinking. And you can see it in the numbers as well. And once again, the fundamental driver of that is also technology, right? Courses Law, which is the British economist who came up with the theory of the firm, like why do firms exist at all in the 1940s and 50s, said it's because it's so difficult to go and find that extra person of talent. It's better they work for you than you constantly having to go and look for them, right? It's like if it takes me a week to find a great graphic designer, much easier for me to have a graphic designer in-house, right?
Because before that, everyone was just a day worker. That's what they just day workers will just get 10 new people. But at some point, it gets more specialized, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so as you scale an organization, you want them all in-house, and there's lots of benefits to that. Well, the internet and now AI is completely changing that dynamic and that trade-off. Yeah. So the stickiness, that transaction cost of finding new people to come and work for you under your umbrella as an organization, it's disintegrating. And so fewer and fewer people are being hired in these big companies.
Yeah, amazing. And so it's not just one. My first thinking, what you just said, like the costs are coming down, everything is easier because of technology. A lot of the things that the big companies were the only ones that could do, you can buy as a service now, right? All those things are happening. But the other thing you mentioned I hadn't thought too much about is like the Uber thing, meaning that's the extreme of if you look at sort of the Japanese model, I have a job for life, and then you have like a day work, and then you have Uber, which is in theory hired, per drive almost, right? That also plays a role, I guess.
Yeah. So the cost of starting a business, let's say if you wanted to become a taxi driver, the cost of a taxi medallion, when it was a heavily regulated and centralized organization, was astronomical. I mean, hundreds of thousands of dollars to get a taxi medallion just to get going. And then you have to have the car and the insurance and everything else. And there's still a great opportunity for that. And then suddenly Uber comes along and says, actually, if you have a driving license, we'll front you the money to get the car if you want it, right? You can loan you the car and you're going to get paid per hour. And it massively reduced the barrier to entry for a lot of new jobs, right? And, same as Shopify, the cost of selling something at a high street store, right? Hundreds of times more expensive than getting going on Shopify. Now, of course, there's always going to be room for the high street store, but all of those people beforehand who couldn't afford to set up their own shop and sell their own goods, they suddenly can with the arrival of marketplaces and online software. So the barriers to entry have lowered, which means many more people are starting their own companies, becoming freelancers or scaling venture-backable businesses.
I've got a question on this that, if that's okay, Heine, to come in on. So it might be a very American-leaning perspective. I'm aware of that. I'm wondering, James, how you think about the opportunity to be an entrepreneur, specifically around needs like health insurance and retirement benefits. And so I love what you're saying around entrepreneurial role models and the barrier to entry being lower in terms of cost from a tech perspective. But I'm someone who's transitioning from always working in corporate settings to being employed for myself. And again, as an American specifically, it's like I can't, because then where does the money to cover those needs come from? Have you done any work or research or looked at like how systems can support there?
Yeah, and actually, the book at the end of it has a manifesto, which is very
She
relevant.
hasn't gotten to the end yet. She's almost done with it.
Oh yeah, and in the UK, very relevant right now. But India's just gone to the polls, and America's going to the polls later this year, which tries to tease out which policies are universally true to support entrepreneurship in this transition, and which policies are country specific. So you're completely right. In the US, there's a load of challenges around health insurance that may stop people becoming entrepreneurs. In some countries, it's around labor laws, right? If you're building a small business, there's only 5 of you in the company, losing one person because of for whatever reason, that's 20% of your workforce. Small businesses can't deal with the same kind of labor laws that maybe a large organization could. There's different access to finance, there's different access to education, and there's different types of role models. So actually, policy plays a huge impact here. And just in the UK, over the last couple of years, there's been a shift in the way freelancers are treated from a tax perspective. And that shift has had a real dent in just a year in the number of people becoming freelancers. So there are specific policies which make a big difference in the likelihood that people will start a business. But the book argues that it is inevitable we're going to move to this world where more people have to, right? Because, as I said, the economic trends and the technological trends behind the way people organize labor are shifting. We're not going to have as many businesses that need to employ hundreds of thousands of people to be highly productive, right? There's going to be a lot of replacement of certain types of scalable work with AI. So what does that mean? Well, as a country, as a government, you have 2 choices. You can force people to take really bad jobs because you've made the alternative of being entrepreneur so impossible because you can't get health insurance, you can't get finance, you can't get a mortgage, you can't get a bank account, all of these things entrepreneurs face. Or you can embrace this change and try and support people in this process. And that does mean changing rules around getting a mortgage, getting healthcare, getting welfare to get you back on your feet if your business doesn't work out. So there's a much more similar experience for people when they're going down the entrepreneurial path than not. So it's country specific for sure, but the fundamental trends are global.
They're just saying that's an inspired view, and to think, if democracy works in some way that it should, that we can impact policies. So, thanks for that.
And the next thing happens, obviously, is that once this starts tipping, the infrastructure also becomes better. So that could be even more people over, right? But what you just said, Courtney, sort of leads me to the next question. I was going to ask, hey, do the numbers actually show this? And we've established they do. But what about the difference in the numbers? Like, in some places, it really is shifting, other places not. And is that politics? And what do you have some examples of that?
Yeah, so it is shifting. So President Biden, I think at the beginning of this year, announced his administration had created more small businesses than ever before, than any president before, which is true. But President Trump could say the same thing, and so could President Obama, because the trend has been behind all of them, right? Yeah. So they could each argue their policies and their administration accelerated this trend, but it has been pretty clearly going up over the years. COVID actually accelerated a lot of new business formation, fell back a little bit, but we're still on an upward plan. So the numbers are there. And as I said, there's a study, or there's an organization, there's a global study of entrepreneurship. It's called the Global Entrepreneurs Monitor, GEM. And they publish studies from over 100 and something countries across the world. So almost every country is monitored. And not just the number of people starting businesses, but also the number of people who want to start businesses is increasing. So it's not just the numbers today, it's the pipeline, it's the aspiration of people.
And also as the infrastructure becomes better, the people that want, some of them are going to move over because of that, right? Yeah.
So you hope it tips. And to your point, Courtney, on democracy, what is the number of people that we have to get to where politicians take it really seriously? Because, in the UK now, there's 4 or 5 million people who are freelancers. That's a serious voting block now, right? When it's 1 or 2 million people, easier to overlook perhaps the freelancer argument. You go knocking on someone's door, you might talk about pensions, you might talk about income tax. Well, those things are less relevant perhaps to a freelancer, or they may be more relevant because it's harder to get a pension and you don't get paid in the same way. But as those numbers grow, entrepreneurs, freelancers, and the impact of tech-led, innovation-led economies becomes clear, I think those policies will follow, or at least you'd hope that they follow to enable this change.
I have it, and that's helpful. And I've got a little bit of a different question. What does your research show you about this trend being driven by people not liking who they work for? And is that a clear enough question?
She's worked for me, so she always asks this question.
Well, I think there's a zeitgeist right now about, well, there has been for a while, about what makes a good leader. And so I'm in a therapist role now. And so much of what comes into the therapy room is about the stress of work. And so much of that is connected to the leadership. And then people talk, I just want to work for myself.
Yeah.
And so I think about individualistic culture and community versus collective, and how entrepreneurialism and smaller business plays into all of those things.
Look, it's a really important question, and sort of teasing out the nature of the entrepreneur, which I try and do some of the book, and the motivations behind it is hard because obviously it's quite a diverse set of people. Some people, as I say, become freelancers because they can't find kinds of work they normally want to do. So it might be a job in between other jobs. Some people do it because they are so difficult to work with. No one else wants to work with them. They just feel they have to go do something themselves or build a company.
Not you.
Yeah.
No, he's not talking about me now. No.
Kind of couldn't get fired, so got hired by anyone else. But he had to start his own company.
Exactly.
But and some people do it. But the major, some people do it because they don't like who they work for currently, right? As you say. But what I boil it down to is those three reasons why people want to be entrepreneurs. If you ask people, it's almost never money, right? Some venture scale entrepreneurs, it is capital. Money does drive them. Certainly in certain financing periods, like ZERP, there was a lot more people who were mercenary doing it because they just want to make loads of money. But for most people who start their own business, I'm not talking about venture scale. I'm talking about lifestyle businesses. I hate it. Businesses they do to cover their costs, right? They're not doing it because they're getting paid more. They're doing it for three reasons. So one is fulfilling work. When you're working for yourself, when you have that slight level of ownership of what you're building, when you're able to make decisions, even if it's frustrating and hard and sales is really difficult, at the end of the day, people find it more fulfilling. They genuinely find it more fulfilling. And so they're willing to take a pay cut to do that. Secondly, to your point about bad bosses, I mean, being an entrepreneur is a fairer way of working. So it's hard, really hard. But generally speaking, people don't care if you went to the same tennis club or you're, the same gender, all of the things, all of the biases that can creep into management of a large organization, right? The boys club, or it's, certain places where you live, or your accent, or whatever it is that people may judge you by things other than your work. Well, entrepreneurship tackles a lot of that, right? Not all of it. There's still many biases in the system, but it's a sort of fairer way of working for some people. And then, to my first point, the other one is just finding work. That it's easier to find work as an entrepreneur to get going than it might be in certain markets or certain skill sets. So the three big motivations I put it down to are, it's fulfilling, it's fairer, and you can find work that way. And one of the big arguments in the book is, as AI becomes more capable, the finding work piece is going to be even harder. And so we need to enable people and give them a chance to be entrepreneurs, to be self-determined, and to use these tools to find work rather than perhaps just be replaced by them.
I was just listening to a podcast with a futurist, and she was talking about job creation because of AI, and saying that there's going to be more, I guess, different types of jobs. And so I'm trying to work that out in my head around the numbers, and I'd have to do a little bit more research. But she was saying, like, if you want to be a robotics engineer, for instance, there will be more opportunity for that. And so I think about how the AI component, does it create less jobs but more niche jobs? And so it's just a bookmark to think about, because I think we've all got, is AI taking all the jobs away on our minds? So it's a good bookmark there. But
it's obviously probably going to be the economic challenge of our time, is navigating that question. In economic history, in recent history, software has almost always created more opportunities for the value generation, for productive work, than it's taken away, right? I know, Hani, this isn't your major form of employment, but you're able to do this now when 20 years ago, only big radio stations could do this kind of thing, right? You enable, millions of more people to be podcasters or interviewers, or whatever it is. This is just one example of a tiny piece of technology, which is streaming technology. That's completely changed the game when it comes to just one job. And there's, it's impacted many different jobs in different ways. So I think it's almost impossible to be one of these like McKinsey forecasters and sit down and say, this is how AI is going to change this one industry, right? This is the future of car manufacturing, and this is how robotics is going to change it all. At a macro level, though, throughout human history, advances in our tools have created more opportunities for productive work. And so I'm positive in that regard. And, there's an argument about total AGI does everything. But I think certainly in the short to medium term, I think it's a very positive thing. However, the road to get there is going to be highly disruptive. And, tying it back to the book, the other thing about being an entrepreneur is the robustness that you need to have as a character trait to survive in that form of employment versus more traditional careers is so different, right? You have to be so used to rejection and failure and volatility and uncertainty. And I think that's going to be a hallmark of many more careers as AI becomes more powerful. And so it's another reason to prepare for a more entrepreneurial society, whether that's through policy, whether it's culturally, whether it's education, because we're going to need those traits.
That was sort of my question. What about AI? I mean, it's any conversation we say we end with what about AI? But so we've done that now. We're all good. But my last question on this before we go on a short break, James, is why did you write this book?
Yeah, so I a couple of reasons. So one is I'm in a really fortunate position. I'm a venture capitalist. My job is to meet literally over 1,000 entrepreneurs a year in some way, shape, or form. I read their pitch deck, send them an email, have coffee, I invest in their company. It's an incredibly privileged position. And beyond, getting to invest in great companies as a result of it, one of the opportunities I have is to take a step back and see some of the trends. And so partly I felt I was in this position where I could see it, and I wanted to use that knowledge in a productive way and share it. And secondly, to your point, Courtney, earlier about, okay, how are we going to make this change happen? Well, what you need is more and more voices out there making the case, right? And that could be a book, it can be in the media, mainstream media, it can be podcasts, it can be video series, whatever it is, to raise the noise around this issue, because there will be policy changes needed. And I hope producing content like this is one way to enable that change.
Yeah. And it's super important. I mean, like you say, it's hard to be a McKinsey consultant and say exactly what's going to happen, but there are certain things we're going to see coming, and we need to prepare for that, right? So totally. Great. I'm not done with it. I'm not going to lie to anybody here. I'm not done with it yet, but I have read a big part of it. It's a great book. I highly recommend it. And great perspective too. I so much agree with the overall perspective. Thank you for that. We are back. So I'd like to combine this a little bit. So in the first segment, we talked about what are the founder's personality traits, what really mattered to get a successful startup. At the same time, we're saying that with the startup century, everyone is becoming an entrepreneur. So how does that add up? Because we say, hey, the bar is high, it's hard to become an entrepreneur. Are we actually lowering the bar? Is there a change of this prototype? You want to start with that, James?
Yeah, so look, I think, and I try and tease this out in the book, there are different types of entrepreneurial activity, right? Some traits are different for people who have different aspirations for the kind of businesses they want to build. But there are also some very similar themes throughout, both the people building globally impactful startups and the people getting their first business going. And I grew up, almost everyone I knew growing up was self-employed or ran a small business. Or I didn't know anyone who was employed by like a bank or a legal firm or even a mid-sized company. And if you look at some of the character traits of people who've worked that way, so tenacity, right? The ability to constantly get pushed back and told no and overcome it. Optimism. The fact that all because I had a bad day today means that I can, see a way through it. I think almost a high level of self-belief to some degree, even if people doubt themselves, their core has to be a core where you believe you can do something, else you're going to give up the first time the road gets hard. Those kinds of traits, I think, are found across entrepreneurs, and whether they're building global tech businesses or they're running a one-person shop in their local town, they're also the traits I fear the education system in many countries doesn't optimize for. And because I know you like stats, Henry, you don't just want theory. Only 6% of people who go to university in the US say it helps them become more entrepreneurial. 6%, right? If it's 6%,
you probably did the opposite, right?
Yeah, it makes them less entrepreneurial. You're right. So if 6% of doctors finished their degree and said, my education degree helped in medicine, only 6%, you'd say, this is terrible. Kill the degree, get rid of it. It's awful. Yeah. And so all of those character traits, I think, are universal to entrepreneurs, but they're not ones necessarily we help people develop.
Well, and you were talking earlier about how having role models plays such an important role, like if you have family role models. And so I think about even when you're younger, like what does that look like in education, even before university years? And I have this example of, we were talking about like entrepreneurialism looking many ways. And for some reason, I'm connecting policy to what that could look like. And in California, I think it was about a year ago, there was some legislation passed allowing street food vendors to exist legally. And I was at a concert at the Greek Theater in Berkeley the other day, walk outside, and there's tons of street food vendors. That to me is entrepreneurialism. Like that to me is one example. And the way that California legislation allowed those people to work in that way, that to me is a great example of the nuance of what we're talking about.
Yeah, and almost universally, there's evidence that if you see a street food vendor and you know somebody who set up a street food vending shop, or your family member did, those things, they may not mean you're going to be a street food vendor, but it enables and gives people permission to experiment with things themselves. Role modeling is one of the most clear positive correlations, if not causations, of people starting a business. And that's so important, because then if you think about some of the biases we have in other parts of the economy, so especially as a woman, but lots of different biases in the economy, how do we tackle that? Well, we celebrate the role models to enable people to see, hey, and there's a really good Danish study on this. As a woman, if you meet another female entrepreneur, you're far more likely to take the risk yourself of starting up than just seeing male entrepreneurs, right? So it's really important that we celebrate stories of success and failure in entrepreneurship to tackle the big challenge, which is it's self-fulfilling. If you don't see entrepreneurs, you don't see people doing their street stall or running their own business or whatever it is, you're just far less likely to try it yourself.
Which makes sense.
Yeah, there's a societal responsibility there to do that, to show people who look like you, whoever the you is, in this role. And so going back to like Silicon Valley, there tends to be a little bit more of a prototype. And so I love the idea of pushing up against that even more than we already do.
Just one story I do remember, that one of my kids finished school. I think it was like 9th grade or something. I think it was Barbara. And the principal stood up on stage and said, yeah, now we're all some of you are going to get a job and others are going to do more education. And they're just, starting a company was just not an option, right? And those things I think are going to change. And then there's going to be, look, that's an option too, right?
Yeah, and look at the incentives we give people. In most Western countries, certainly most developed economies now, you finish university school at the age of 18, and the government will lend you tens of thousands of dollars, in some cases, hundreds of thousands of dollars to pursue education. They will not give you an overdraft if you go and start a business, right? A bank won't bank you if you say, I'm leaving school to start a business. So why do we do that, right? So it's clearly not the most effective way to encourage people to be entrepreneurs. And by the way, you only get paid back half of that anyway, because people's careers don't always match up to the debt they take on. So why not give people similar access to debt to say, hey, look, we're going to underwrite the debt on your first business. We're going to lend you $20,000. If you pay us back, great. We make money as a taxpayer. If we don't, well, hopefully you've had a much richer education in something than perhaps some university degrees. Different type of education.
Isn't that what VCs are for?
Well, there's only so much we can do. I get to invest in 2 or 3 companies a year. Unfortunately, I alone cannot fix this.
No. Okay, so we're going to stay on the founders now. We're going to move forward and back to the research we talked about earlier. There's one thing we found that was interesting, and we wanted to include you in, James. So it was that being more than one founder really increased the odds. So startups with 3 or more founders are more than twice as likely to succeed compared to solo founded startups. So first, is it true, and why is that? Yeah,
so our data set, we look at this a lot, right? Because obviously we back teams sometimes when they're very, very early. And we've invested in companies with solo founders, some with up to 5 founders. Beyond that, it gets very tricky. But the average for us is about 2.1, 2.2 founders.
Okay.
So that's the average. And I think that's for a number of reasons. So one is, it's really, the obvious one, it's really, really hard. And as anyone who started a business knows, having someone who's there with you, who shares their identity with the success or not of the business, is so incredibly valuable. It doesn't half the pain, but it shares the pain. And I think that starting point for the first few years is irreplaceable. You can have investors with skin in the game. You can have employees with lots of equity. But ultimately, when you're the founders, it's on you. And sharing that, I think, is really important. As it happens, as a business scales, we do see more likely than not, the founders will move away. So if you start with 3 founders, you may end up with 1 founder as CEO in 3 or 4 years' time, when a lot of that initial fear of failure and drive sort of changes. And then the other one is skills complementarity. I think it is hard to have all of the skills within one person.
That's both diversity in skills, but also diversity in personality, like just different things. We talked about that earlier.
Sure.
I have one story I want to tell, and I'm actually going to name the people here because they became very successful right after. So I was in our office in San Francisco, and I saw a lot of founders. And one day, a company called Too Good to Go came along, and I'm sure you heard about it. It's a global company. They've done so incredibly well. So that's why I can tell a somewhat weird story about them. But they come to the office, and they're like 7 guys. They might have been 6 or something. And I remember my assistant at the time came up to me and says, "Heine, the Beach Boys are here." He's like, "What the hell is she talking about?" And it's like 6 dudes, probably in California for the first time, all in shorts and coming into the meetings, like 6 guys, same age, same. And then we talked about the startup a little bit, and I talked about, so you're building the next version. Who's building it? They're like, "You're 6 guys." Yeah, none of us. We have external people doing that. Like, this was just, I mean, this company became very, very successful later, but this was not the right founding team, right? There was no diversity, and there was not even an engineer in the team or someone with tech knowledge. So it's amazing they did so well, and they fixed it later and got some really good people to help that. But it's just an example of that. Yeah, you need some diversity there.
Yeah, you need people with different skills, different outlooks, and having said all of that, we've seen almost every combination work and not work, right? Exactly. So there's no hard and fast rule here.
It's just odds, though.
Yeah, it can help.
Okay, let's get to the fun part here before we end. So one question that I'm trying to both asking co-hosts and guests on here is, what are you obsessed by right now? And who wants to start with that? I told you before I was going to ask this question, so there are no excuses this time. I'm not sure what I'm going to answer this week, but let's hear it. Who wants to start?
I mean, I'm happy to start. I mean, it may not be relevant to everyone right now, but my wife's pregnant at the moment. We're about to have our second child in the next week or so, and I have a toddler, a little boy, and I am obsessed with how on earth we're going to navigate the relationship between a little boy.
The founding team, you mean?
Yeah, the founding team of our family, and I can't imagine what he's about to go through. You've got this, little setup of your mum and your dad looking after you the whole time, all the attention, and this little girl's going to turn up on his doorstep in about 2 weeks' time. So I've been reading a lot about it. I've been asking people about it for tips. I'm trying to navigate it because it's going to be a big moment for all of us.
Well, James, funny you should bring that in. Last time when Heine asked me this, I said my obsession is Dr. Becky. Do you know Dr. Becky?
No, I don't think I know Dr. Becky.
She's a parenting and child psychologist, and she has phenomenal resources. I bring them into my work all the time. And so I told Heine no one's going to care, and maybe no one will care, that's listening to this, but that was a wrong assumption. So
I will check out Dr. Becky.
And congratulations. That's exciting.
Yeah, congrats. It's going to be fun. What do you say, Courtney?
I've got a little bit of, so on Netflix, I don't know where it's available, so I'll caveat with that. There's a documentary called The Greatest Night in Pop. Have either of you seen it?
Oh, I've seen it. Yeah, it's amazing.
It's about the 1985 song that came out for USA for Africa. And like everybody who was big rock stars at the time was in it. We've got Bruce Springsteen. We've got Michael Jackson.
They're all there.
Cyndi Lauper, Paul Simon. And so my partner Ryan and I watched it and we got obsessed. We've watched it a couple of times now.
It's amazing.
It's so good. Hearing this, like the song is like, okay, but hearing those iconic voices and watching how this all came together, you have to watch it and then go see Bruce Springsteen or Cyndi Lauper, whoever's on tour. Yeah, that's what I got.
It's the song "We Are the World," and you gather 50 to 50 egos like that are out of this world, but you still manage to get them in a room. Like at 2 a.m. at night or something? Courtney, what was
one night, it was after, I think, the American Music Awards. Lionel Richie orchestrated all of this.
Insane.
With multiple other names that you will know. Yeah, and they all come together. It's just, it sounds like, okay, I don't know. When I first heard about it, I was like, what is this? And then you watch it and you get sucked in and there's nostalgia there. So
yeah, totally. Okay, I'm going to give you one too. So, which is a really, it's quite a small thing, or it's a big thing, but then not. So, a couple of months ago, I had invited. So my old friends were, when I grew up in the Faroe Islands, were like 15, 16 guys that always hung out, and we've always stayed in touch and been drinking once in a while. And one day, I have a house in the south now, and said we haven't traveled anywhere for a long time. It's 30 years since we were in Mallorca or wherever we were. 30. Maybe we should do it again. And then we gathered 14 of my old dudes in my house down there, and it was just amazing. But the reason why I'm obsessed with it right now is because we went to our restaurant there we always go to, and we got the waiter to take a picture, and he managed to take just a great picture of all 14 of us, like in a circle. And now this is only going to be for the guys that are on the video feed here, but I just got the picture back, and it's like a Jesus kind of picture.
Wow.
Here. Of
That's
all
great.
14 of us 30 years later, which I think is just, I'm a little obsessed by that. I think that's a little bit.
Are you obsessed by the picture or the experience?
It's both, but then the picture came and like, holy shit, because my mom said, "Hi, you got to take this picture and frame it." And then I just went to the frame store now and got it back. And it's like, yeah, it's amazing.
It Right.
Cool.
Yeah, it's very cool. We're privileged. Okay, so we've come to the end. Thank you very much, guys. So everyone else, please make sure you follow and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and please give us a review or a rating. It really helps. For all of you on YouTube, please make sure you check out Raw Startup. A lot of videos about how to build a startup. This has been Founders Weekly. Now stop listening and go build something.